My name is Benjamin Berry, and this is my contemporary leader presentation. For my project, I chose to interview Kevin Berry, a long-term property manager at Coronado Apartments. Kevin spent over a decade leading a large team and supporting hundreds of residents each day. I chose to interview him because he requires constant decision-making in his field of work, as well as conflict resolution between residents and employees, as well as balancing the needs of residents over certain requirements that the company needs to reach each year, which is exactly where it shows up in real life and kind of demonstrates his servant leadership abilities. He manages everything from staff communications to resident concerns to large-scale property issues. His ability to stay calm and fair and just keep an atmosphere that's very organized during all this makes him an ideal example and a very practical example for leadership, especially. Not just theoretical, but like real practical leadership, and that's part of the reason I chose him. Okay, Kevin said his biggest professional achievement was the full property renovation in 2017. This was around a 14-month project where he updated 60 apartments and modernized the layouts. He oversaw like major upgrades to the community spaces. He also explained to me that the key to having it turn out as well as it did was keeping everything on track with like really good communication, being clear with contractors, staff, residents, just making sure that everyone knows what's going on. It eliminates that confusion that can lead to problems. But one big improvement was the transformation of the pool, which wasn't just cosmetic. He wanted to create a space where the kids and just like the community could come together and kind of force some of that community interaction. He also pushed for efficient HVAC systems, so heating and cooling units, to reduce the long-term costs and lower their environmental impact, which shows Kevin's foresight, and a core leadership trait is planning for the future and making sure you're not caught off guard by these by problems that might come up. But the renovation finished ahead of schedule, and occupancy rose from 92% to 97%, which showed how well residents responded to these improvements. One of Kevin's biggest challenges happened during COVID-19, when many residents faced sudden financial hardship. He felt stuck between enforcing rent policies and making sure everyone pays on time, and wanting to help people who are generally struggling or maybe just lost their job and just can't afford to stay there. But this is where his leadership style really stood out to me, because he led with empathy, which is a leadership style that recognizes people's feelings and struggles, and it just tries to connect with them and see what they're going through, like walk a mile in their shoes, and really connecting with his residents. But instead of just relying on strict enforcement, he worked with residents to create flexible payment plans and made sure everyone understood any changes in the policy and kept people updated through that clear communication the entire way. But Kevin said this was an emotionally draining time, as it was for everyone during the COVID-19 pandemic. But he believes that trust built during this pandemic strengthened the community overall, because they had to get through this and they all respect Kevin as a leader, but more as a compassionate leader, not someone who just rules through their status. During the renovation, Kevin mainly relied on two types of power: expert power and reverent power. Expert power means people follow you because they genuinely know what you're doing, and you make the expectations and the job very clear, so people aren't questioning and afraid to move on in fear of that they're doing it wrong. But Kevin's been doing this for many years, employing this kind of management style. But I think his years of property management really give him that ability to command that kind of respect and just create an atmosphere where everyone knows that he's the one in charge and they can have questions and go to him and not be afraid of that. And moving on to reverent power comes from trust and respect. People want to follow you because of who you are, not just your job title or what you've accomplished. But Kevin built this through weekly check-ins, open communication, and making sure everyone felt supported inside his employees, his residents, everyone he worked around. But he avoided using coercive power, which is power based on fear or punishment, which isn't very sustainable in the long run because people will only work as hard as to not get in trouble. But moving on, he also avoided using legitimate power. Because he is a manager, he does have the power to order around people, but he doesn't just command people to do things without any explanation or reasoning behind why they're doing it. But yeah, that power is authority based and it's solely based on your title. It's like, I'm the leader, you must listen to me. But instead of that, he strengthened relationships and created a mutual type of leadership where they look to him as a figurehead, but not someone that they should be afraid of or looked down upon in any way. Kevin's leadership style reflects servant leadership in many ways. He consistently focuses on supporting his team and keeping residents informed and making sure everyone has what they need for the task that he assigned to them. And that's a very important and kind of key distinguisher between servant leadership and other forms of leadership. They really focus on the person and less so the task. But his priority was always the people he served, not personal recognition or financial gain. Those were very large parts in his leadership, but they're not the main focus. The renovation is a great example, but COVID-19 highlighted it even more. He helped residents apply for assistance, advocated for flexible payment plans, and stayed emotionally present for people who were going through difficult times, whether that be employees or residents. But his actions showed how servant leadership builds trust, loyalty, and a stronger sense of community as I got to know Kevin a bit more and the community he's been building. Kevin's leadership constantly reflects servant leadership, which means putting people's needs first and helping people do their best work instead of just focusing on authority and recognition. He focuses on support and communication and making sure other people feel valued and heard. But during the renovation, he removed obstacles so his team and contractors could work effectively and making sure he communicated very thoroughly with all parties involved so that way it takes that stress off of them and minimizes miscommunications. But during COVID-19, he went even further, helping residents apply for rental assistance and advocating internally for more flexible payment plans and making sure that the staff felt emotionally supported. All of these are characteristics of servant leadership when looked at closely. And servant leadership is often described as leadership through service, and Kevin demonstrated this very practically. And we get to see how his actions really demonstrate servant leadership, but in a very practical and down-to-earth way, because he is a property manager. When comparing Kevin to Tom Bizzuto, it's important to understand that they share a people-first mindset, but they operate on different scales. Tom Bizzuto is the founder of the Bizzuto Group, which has over 45 years in industry experience and built his company around values like integrity, creativity, and concern for the community, or as far as his mission statement says. His style reflects transformational leadership, which means inspiring people through a strong vision and motivating them to grow. Tom spends time with employees, visits job sites, and stays personally connected, similar to how Kevin builds relationships at Coronado, except for Kevin's is a lot more face-to-face and hands-on, because Tom's company is much more diversified. The difference is scope, however. Kevin leads one property while Tom leads an entire organization of properties. Tom's challenge is scalability. Transformational leadership can be hard to maintain across hundreds of locations because he can't be there for each one. Because that kind of leadership is very personal. It's a personal connection which becomes harder to replicate. Another difference is making decisions and the speed in which you can make decisions. Tom's value-driven approach sometimes slows aggressive business moves, like if you wanted to do something very quickly, but he prefers doing things the right way over the quick way, or according to him at least. But Kevin, on the other hand, showed more flexibility during COVID-19 as he quickly adjusted policies and reached out to management to support the residents and employees. But both styles are definitely a very good type of leadership and can both see incredible amounts of success, but they succeed differently in just different environments. Both Kevin and Tom's leadership style have clear strengths and natural limitations, but Kevin's servant leadership builds loyalty, trust, and a strong sense of community within his group. However, servant leadership can slow decision making as well, because it requires collaboration and seeing other people's points of views, which is obviously a lot less fast than just one person seeing something and doing it. But gathering a lot of input is definitely a characteristic of their leadership style. But in fast-moving situations, this can seem less assertive. As far as Tom's transformational leadership excels at inspiring people and pushing teams towards long-term goals, but it can also create pressure or burnout if expectations get too high, because it's a stress towards constantly improving, and at a point you can't improve anymore. But transformational leaders sometimes rely heavily on their personal vision, which can limit their collaboration, because it's a lot less seeing what everyone's view is on something. But if it's not balanced well, it can definitely lead to that. Both approaches are very effective in their own right. You just come with different trade-offs that the leaders have to deal with and then manage after. Kevin helped me understand how important clear communication is. His weekly check-ins during the renovation and the pandemic helped keep everyone on the same page and eased uncertainty, at least for on both sides, for residents and for Kevin. Just knowing that the people he's working with and surround himself are doing okay, he said it gains him a lot of closure. But I also learned a lot about the power of empathy and servant leadership, and seeing how that shows itself in a practical sense. But supporting people to lead their best life and to build a stronger relationship between them, I think is a really good way in achieving some very substantial results. But another major lesson that came from my discussion with Kevin was delegation. Delegation is something that he learned early in his career. He tried to manage it and he tried to handle everything by himself, but that led to burnout. And learning how to delegate tasks and how to properly instruct people on how to do those tasks, he said, was the largest lesson he's learned over his time here. I chose Kevin because I could interview him directly and observe his leadership style in a real life environment. His hands-on, empathetic style made him a strong example of servant leadership. And I chose Tom Bizzuto because he's widely recognized as a major influence in property management and represents transformational leadership at an industry-wide level. But I chose this so I could compare the two. During the interview with Kevin, I avoided academic language and instead used practical questions. He could tell me real stories, and I could kind of observe the leadership style in that. But for Tom, I used company values, interviews, their mission statements, as well as public content published content of his leadership style, like his talks. What I learned overall is that leadership style becomes easier to understand when it's tied to everyday behaviors. And it's just a lot easier to see when it's a lot more practical and they give real experiences. But this project helped me grow in my interviewing analysis skills and translating leadership concepts into something meaningful and practical. And here are my references, and that is it.